The little girl in the white dress didn't look back. She broke away from her mother's side with the focused certainty of someone who had been waiting a long time to arrive somewhere, and she walked across the naval discharge ceremony hall like she owned every step of it. 2 years old, white dress, small white shoes that made no sound on the polished floor. The hall was packed, mothers with flowers pressed to their chests, girlfriends gripping each other's arms, fathers standing straight, trying not to let their faces do the thing faces do when relief arrives after long absence. The noise of reunion, names called across rooms, the specific sound of people finding each other after too long apart. One man was not being found. Kang Min-jae stood in his dress uniform at the end of the row and looked at the door one time. Then he stopped looking. He had buried his mother 11 days ago. His sister Jisoo had been gone before his service even started. He was the last of his family, standing, and the hall full of love was making that fact louder than it had ever been. He had decided, somewhere in the deep water of his second year of service, that he could survive being alone. He had built an entire architecture around that decision. He was about to find out it was made of paper. Movement at the edge of his vision. Low, below the level of adult attention. He looked down. A child stood 3 feet away. Dark eyes. His jawline. He would not understand this for another 30 seconds, but something in him registered it before his mind caught up. She looked up at him with the calm of someone who has located exactly what they were looking for. She reached up and tapped his hand with one small finger. "Daddy." The word detonated in his chest. He went down to one knee, studied her face with the focus of a man trying to stay inside his own body while everything rearranged itself. Looked up, across the hall, past the reuniting families, past the flowers, and the crying mothers, and found a woman standing at the back wall. She had her arms folded, chin lifted. She was watching him with the expression of a woman who has already survived the hardest version of this moment inside her own head, multiple times, and has shown up anyway. He knew that face. He had been trying not to think about that face for 2 years and 8 months. He stood, the little girl's hand in his, and walked toward Beverly Williams. If you think you know where this story is going, you don't. Stay with it, because the woman at that back wall made choices that most people don't have the courage to even consider, and by the end of this story, your opinion of her is going to be divided right down the middle. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and let's go back to where this actually started, because this ending only means something if you understand what Beverly Williams walked through to get here. 18 months earlier, Atlanta, Georgia. Beverly Williams was 35 years old and she was tired in the way that doesn't show on the outside. Good job. Nice apartment. The kind of woman who got called put together. So often it had started to feel like an insult, because put together meant people had stopped asking if she was okay. They'd decided she was and moved on. Her apartment was impeccably designed. She was an interior designer. It was professionally embarrassing for it to be anything else. And it was completely empty of the kind of warmth that comes from another person, living inside a space with you. Her doctor delivered the news with the careful expression of someone who has practiced softening things. Your AMH levels are lower than we'd like for your age, Beverly. This doesn't mean it's impossible, but the window is narrowing faster than we'd expect. Beverly nodded, asked 2 clinical questions, thanked the doctor, drove to her parking garage, pulled into her spot, turned the car off, sat there for 11 minutes. Then she went upstairs and made dinner and did not tell a single person. She told her best friend Danielle 2 weeks later, over wine in Beverly's living room, in the way you tell someone something you've been carrying, all at once, quickly, like removing a bandage. Danielle set her glass down and said, "Okay, what do you want to do?" That was why Beverly had told Danielle and not her mother. Danielle asked what you wanted. Her mother would have asked what went wrong. "I don't know yet," Beverly said. "You will?" Danielle said. "You always do." Then Marcus appeared, 4 months of video calls that Beverly would later be unable to fully explain to herself, because she was not a naive woman, and yet he was Atlanta-based, temporarily in Seoul on a business contract, charming in the specific way of a man who has studied what a particular kind of woman needs and learned to supply it at exactly the right intervals. He learned her coffee order over FaceTime. He sent her playlists with handwritten style notes attached. He told her Seoul was extraordinary and she should see it. He told her she was extraordinary and she should believe it. Danielle, on a Sunday call, said, "Something about him feels like a performance." "You've never met him," Beverly said. "I've met the type," Danielle said. "Just go slow." Beverly booked the ticket 3 days later. She did not go slow. She went because the doctor's office was still sitting inside her chest, and Seoul was somewhere that didn't know what she was supposed to be yet. And sometimes the bravest and the most reckless thing are the same decision wearing different clothes, and you don't know which one you made until you're standing in the aftermath. She landed at Incheon with a rolling suitcase, a phrase book she'd barely opened, and the specific hope of a woman who has talked herself into being brave. Marcus was not at the airport. He texted, "Running late, go to the hotel, dinner tonight for sure." Beverly went to the hotel. She unpacked carefully, changed clothes, sat on the bed and looked at her phone. He texted again at 6. "On my way. 20 minutes. Then silence. She called at 8. He answered, laughed too easily, said something came up. Tomorrow, for sure. Seoul was beautiful, wasn't it? She should walk around. She should enjoy it. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. The next evening, she walked to the restaurant he'd named. A small place in Hongdae, warm light, the kind of window that fogs slightly in cold weather so everything inside looks soft. Beverly saw him before she opened the door. Corner table. 2 Korean women, one on each side. Marcus in the middle, looking like a man entirely at home in his life, comfortable and laughing and not waiting for anyone. He had never been waiting for Beverly. The calls, the playlists, the coffee order over FaceTime, all of it had been something he did the way some people run multiple browsers. She was a tab he hadn't closed. She stood on that street in the cold, and she understood everything in approximately 10 seconds. She did not go in. She did not call him. She deleted his number standing on the pavement, and she dropped her phrasebook in the nearest bin because she had bought it for this trip, and this trip had just ended, and then she walked into Seoul alone. She walked for 40 minutes. She did not cry. She was not sad the way people expect. She was something colder and more complete than sad, the feeling of a woman who took a risk and got the answer she'd been half expecting, and now has to decide what to do with the confirmation. She ended up in a bar in Mafia because it was small and quiet, and had stools at the counter and she needed somewhere to sit down. Kang was already there. He was not trying to meet anyone. He was nursing a drink with the focused attention of a man using his hands as an anchor point. If his hands were doing something, the rest of him could hold still. He was 29 years old. His sister Jisoo had died 3 weeks ago. Sudden, senseless, the kind of death that doesn't come with a reason you can locate and examine no matter how long you sit with it. And Minjae had been sitting with it. He was leaving for naval service in 4 days. His father's investment firm was struggling. His mother was sick in the way she kept insisting wasn't serious, which was how Minjae knew it was. He was a man with too many things to hold, and no one left to help him hold them. And he had been coming to this bar every night that week because the bartender didn't ask him anything. Beverly knocked her drink over, reaching for her phone. Minjae pushed napkins toward her without looking up. She said, "Thank you" in Korean, so broken it was almost a different language entirely. He said, in perfect English, without inflection, "Your Korean is terrible." Beverly looked at him and laughed. Not politely, not performatively, actually laughed, the first real sound she'd made since landing in Seoul, because his bluntness was so clean and unexpected that it cut right through the layer of collected humiliation she'd been carrying since the restaurant window. He looked up, slightly surprised. She was already shaking her head. Rough night, she said. Rough 3 weeks, he said. They started talking. Not the way strangers talk at bars, not the version where you're auditioning, where you're managing impressions, where you're deciding how much of yourself is safe to show. They talked the way people talk when they've both already lost something that night and have nothing left to protect. The bar stayed quiet around them. The bartender left them alone. Seoul happened outside the door and was irrelevant. Beverly told him about Marcus. All of it. The 4 months, the coffee order, the phrase book in the bin, the window in Hongdae. She told it straight, like someone giving directions. No tears, no performance. Just the facts of a woman who wanted something real and got a very expensive lesson instead. Min-jae listened without filling the silences. Then he said, "Why did you stay when he didn't show the first night?" Beverly looked at her drink. "Because I'd already bought the ticket. Because I kept thinking there was an explanation." She paused. "Because I wanted it to be true." "That's not stupid," Min-jae said. "That's just human." "It feels stupid." "Most human things do afterward." She looked at him. "Your turn." He told her about Jisoo. He talked about his sister for almost an hour. Not the death, mostly, but Jisoo alive. The way she argued with him. The specific laugh she had when she thought something was absurd. The habit she had of doing things with her hands when she was thinking. A kind of unconscious tapping that drove their mother insane, and that Min-jae would give anything to see one more time. He talked about leaving in 4 days and not knowing how to be a person whose family is disappearing. His mother sick. His father shrinking inside the investment firm that used to be his pride. And Jisoo gone, the one who had always been the emotional center of all of them. The one who knew what everyone needed before they asked. "So you're sitting here," Beverly said, "because going home means walking into a place where she isn't." "Yes," Min-jae said, simply. "I know that feeling," Beverly said. Different version, same room. They sat with that for a moment, the kind of silence that isn't empty. "You're going to military service in 4 days," Beverly said. "That's running toward something." "Or away," Min-jae said. "I haven't decided which yet." "Me neither, about Seoul." He looked at her. The bar light was low and his face was doing something she hadn't seen it do yet. Not guarded, not performing, just present. Just a person in a room being real. "I think," he said slowly, "that sometimes the only honest thing you can do is put yourself somewhere completely different and see who you are there." "And who are you here?" Beverly asked. He thought about it seriously, which she hadn't expected. "Someone without a script," he said finally. "For the first time in a long time." Beverly nodded. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." The bar closed. The night made its own decisions. The kind that happen between two people who have been honest with each other in the dark and have found something neither of them was looking for. Beverly understood, even in the middle of it, that this was the most real thing that had happened to her in 3 years, and it was happening with a man who was leaving in 4 days. She knew that. She held that knowledge alongside everything else, and she chose the night anyway, because she was 35 years old and tired of choosing safety over real. The next morning, Min-jae was gone. No note. The other side of the bed, cold. Seoul beginning outside the window. The specific gray light of a Korean morning. Traffic sounds. Someone's radio from a floor above. Beverly lay there and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then she picked up her phone. Opened the airline app. Looked at the return flights. Put it back down. She didn't understand, in that moment, why her hands wouldn't complete the booking. She would understand it later. She would understand it 6 weeks later, on the floor of a pharmacy bathroom, looking at 2 lines on a test. Here's what I need you to understand about Beverly Williams before this story goes any further. She was not a woman who made impulsive decisions. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life making careful, considered, correct decisions and had arrived at 35 with a beautiful empty apartment and a narrowing window and a doctor's voice she couldn't stop hearing. The impulsive thing, the reckless thing, was thinking that careful and correct would eventually add up to a life that felt like something. Beverly Williams was not reckless when she stayed in Seoul. She was, for the first time, honest. And if you want to argue with that in the comments, good. Drop your take. Because this is the most divisive decision she makes, and the one that changes everything. 6 weeks after the bar in Mapo, Beverly was in a pharmacy in Mapo-gu, using Google Translate to navigate shelves she couldn't read, and she found what she'd been half dreading and half expecting for 2 weeks. She bought it without letting herself think. Went back to the Airbnb, locked the bathroom door even though she was alone. 2 lines. Beverly sat on the tile floor with her back against the bathtub and looked at the result. She expected panic. What arrived instead was something she couldn't immediately name. A long, complete exhale, like a woman who has been holding her breath for 3 years and has finally been given permission to stop. Not because this was the plan, there was no plan, but the thing she'd been most afraid of, the narrowing window, the clock, the possibility that she'd waited too long for something she actually wanted. That fear had just been answered. In the least expected way, in the worst logistical circumstances, by a man who left without a note. The universe had a sense of humor, and Beverly Williams was not, in this moment, laughing. She went to the kitchen. She followed a YouTube tutorial for doenjang jjigae, the Korean soybean paste stew she'd ordered twice at a nearby restaurant because it was the one thing in Seoul that had felt inexplicably like comfort. She got it wrong the first time. Too much paste, the broth too dark, the tofu falling apart. She watched the video again, tried again, got it close enough. She sat at the window with the bowl in both hands, watching Seoul at night, and she made a decision so quietly, it barely registered as a decision at all. She was staying. She called Danielle the next morning. "Tell me everything," Danielle said, because she had been waiting for 3 weeks with the patience of a woman who knows better than to push Beverly Williams into a conversation she hasn't finished processing. Beverly told her everything. The bar, Min Jae, his leaving, the pharmacy floor, the 2 lines. She told it straight. When she finished, the line was quiet for a moment. Then Danielle said, "Where is he now?" "Naval service. He left 4 days after we met." "Does he know?" "No." "Are you going to tell him?" "I don't know how to find him." "Beverly," Danielle's voice was careful. "Come home. You can figure this out from Atlanta. You don't have to do this alone in a country where you don't speak the language." "I know Korean," Beverly said. "You know 12 words of Korean." "It's a start." "Beverly?" "Danielle." Beverly looked out the window at Seoul. "I'm not leaving. I don't fully understand why yet, but I'm not leaving." Silence. Then Danielle said, "Okay." "Okay? You've made decisions I didn't understand before, and you've always known something I didn't. So, okay, but you call me. You call me when it gets hard, which it will, and you don't do the thing where you go quiet because you don't want to seem like you're struggling." "I do that thing," Beverly admitted. "You absolutely do that thing. Call me." "I'll call you." She stayed on the line with Danielle for another hour, talking through the practical realities, finances, visa extension options, prenatal care in Seoul, the freelance interior design work Beverly had already been picking up through expat networks. Danielle, who was an accountant by profession and precise by nature, helped Beverly build a spreadsheet of what the next 6 months would cost. It was, Beverly noted, extremely scary when laid out numerically. It was also survivable. "You can do this," Danielle said at the end. "I know," Beverly said. And then, because Danielle had earned honesty, "I'm terrified." "That's how you know it matters," Danielle said. What came next was not a movie montage. Beverly would like the record to show that nobody surviving Seoul alone and pregnant gets a montage. What Beverly got was reality in very specific, unromantic installments, and she lived through every one of them. The apartment first. Her Airbnb lease expired and the landlord, a compact, skeptical man in his 60s, named Mr. O, who had the expression of someone who had seen foreign tenants leave without notice and was not interested in repeating the experience, sat across from her at a plastic table and explained in Korean why he was not interested in a long-term arrangement. Beverly had her translation app open, her bank statements printed, and 3 months of rent ready in cash. She negotiated for 45 minutes. She got the apartment. Mr. O took the money with the expression of a man who has been surprised and doesn't enjoy the feeling, but she had the keys before she left the building. The prenatal clinic was its own education. Beverly found one with an English-speaking receptionist, which meant the receptionist could register her and tell her where to sit. The doctor's English was limited to medical terminology, which was actually more useful than conversational English in that setting. Beverly learned to use her translation app in the exam room, holding it up, pointing, repeating syllables back until the meaning was clear. A nurse named Jiyeon started supplementing this with handwritten notes, simple Korean words with small illustrations beside them, a visual dictionary of pregnancy that she added to every appointment. These words are for the pharmacy. These words mean you need to call us. This word means pain. This word means normal. Beverly kept every piece of paper in a folder. She carried the folder everywhere. Korean arrived in fragments. The market grandmother in Mapo who found Beverly's pronunciation physically painful and taught her vegetable names. Anyway, pressing extra scallions into her bag and refusing to charge for them. The convenience store owner near her apartment, who corrected her every time she came in. Not unkindly, just reflexively, the way you correct someone you've decided belongs in your neighborhood. Jaeyeon at the clinic, who would lower her voice at the end of appointments and teach Beverly phrases the way you teach something important, slowly, with repetition, making Beverly say it back until it was right. Beverly practiced 3 sentences every morning in the bathroom mirror. I live here. My name is Beverly. I'm not leaving. She got the sentence for I'm not leaving from Jiyeon, who had given her a look when Beverly asked for it, and then written it down without asking why. The pregnancy was honest about itself. It did not perform wellness. The second trimester arrived with 2 a.m. nausea that had an appointment-like regularity, which meant Beverly standing over her small stove in the dark, making doenjang jjigae, because it was the one thing she'd found that didn't make the nausea worse. The fermented paste smell, the warmth of the broth, some combination that her body had decided was safe. She would stand there with one hand on her growing stomach in the dark kitchen, watching the steam rise, soul quiet outside the window at 2 a.m., and she would talk to the baby. Not about anything specific, just out loud so the apartment wasn't silent, so there was a voice in it. She called Danielle during one of these nights. 2 a.m. Seoul time, which was the previous afternoon in Atlanta. She didn't say she was struggling. She described the jjigae in detail instead. Danielle listened to the entire description of fermented soybean paste stew being cooked at 2 a.m. in a foreign country and then said, Beverly, are you okay? Beverly stirred the pot. I'm making soup at 2 in the morning alone in Seoul while 6 months pregnant. That's not an answer. No, Beverly said. I know. The steam rose. Outside, a car passed. I'm scared, Danielle. Not about the baby, about whether I'm building something real or whether I'm just too stubborn to admit I should have come home. What does it feel like? Danielle asked. The life you're building there. What does it actually feel like? Beverly thought about it honestly. The market grandmother with the scallions, Mr. O's expression when she'd put the cash on the table, Jiyeon's handwritten notes, the apartment that she'd arranged herself with secondhand furniture and her own eye, the freelance projects she'd started picking up. It feels like mine, Beverly said finally. Then it's real, Danielle said. Keep the receipts and call me tomorrow. Beverly assembled a second-hand crib alone on a Saturday afternoon in her 7th month and missed a bolt, sat on the floor surrounded by hardware she couldn't identify, looked at the instruction manual which was in Korean and Japanese and notably not English, and laughed. actually laughed, alone on her apartment floor, because the alternative was crying and she was saving the crying for moments that required it. She figured out the bolt. The crib stood. Sila arrived in April, during a rainstorm that Beverly would always remember as Seoul's way of being dramatic about something important. The hospital was efficient and impersonal in the way of public hospitals everywhere, except for Jiyeon, who had arranged to be present and held Beverly's hand through the hardest part, and taught her, between contractions, how to say "I can do this" in Korean. Beverly said it 11 times. It worked 11 times. She held Sayla and looked at her face. Min Jae's jawline, his stillness, something around the eyes that Beverly had been half expecting for 9 months and still wasn't ready for. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead, and the hospital room went very quiet around her, and she said, in Korean, because it felt right in that moment, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." Sayla blinked, apparently satisfied. Beverly had called her mother from the hospital, not to ask permission, not to soften it. Her mother, Lorraine, had said, "Is he there with you?" And Beverly had said no, and Lorraine had been silent and then said, "I'll send money," and Beverly had cried after she hung up. Not because her mother was cold, but because that "I'll send money" was the closest Lorraine Williams knew how to get to. "I'm terrified for you, and I love you, and please be okay." Beverly knew the difference. It still cost her something to receive it. She called Danielle immediately after, who said, "She's here! Send pictures immediately," and cried on the phone, which Beverly needed more than she could have predicted. Sila's first year was built out of 1,000 small, ordinary moments that Beverly collected like evidence that she had made the right call. First, solid food. Overcooked porridge that Sayla ate with tremendous enthusiasm, which made Beverly cry, which made Sayla stare at her with the focused expression of someone filing this reaction away for future reference. First steps across the apartment floor, Beverly's hands hovering, never quite catching, letting her fall and get up, because Beverly had learned something about herself and Seoul that she wanted Sayla to learn young. The falling is never the problem. Sayla's first word was not "Mama." Beverly had been campaigning for Mama for weeks, narrating her own presence constantly, pointing at herself, saying "Mama" with the deliberate clarity of a woman who considers herself a strong candidate. Sayla's first clear, repeated, intentional word, delivered at the kitchen stove one morning while pointing at the pot with full conviction, was "Jejike." Beverly sat on the kitchen floor and laughed for 3 straight minutes. Then she called Danielle and said, "Her first word is the Korean soup I've been making at 2 a.m. this entire time." And Danielle laughed so hard she dropped her phone. Beverly was working. Freelance interior design, built slowly through expat networks and referrals, and one coffee shop redesign that got photographed for a local lifestyle blog and opened a new tier of clients. She was good. Not in the way of someone who has found a job that pays well, but in the way of someone who has found the version of their skill that is entirely theirs, stripped of the politics and the being passed over and the careful performance of a corporate environment. In Seoul, Beverly designed with her whole self because there was no one watching who knew what she was supposed to be. Then Sayla, 14 months old, pointed at a man in naval uniform on television and said, "Daddy." Beverly went completely still. "Where did you learn that word?" she said, quietly. Sayla pointed at the screen again, confident. "Daddy." Beverly turned the television off, sat on the couch, looked at her daughter, who had already moved on to investigating a sock, with the focused energy of someone who finds socks genuinely fascinating. She sat there for a long time. Then she found the Kang family. And here's where this story is going to make some of you deeply uncomfortable, because Beverly Williams, a Black American woman alone in Seoul with a 14-month-old daughter, made the decision to find a Korean family she'd never met and introduce herself as the mother of their son's child. Some of you think she should have stayed quiet. Some of you think she waited too long. Both of those opinions are in the comments right now, and I want to hear them. Subscribe and drop it below, because this story is about to get much more complicated. Min Jae had told her enough that night in Mapo. his father's investment firm, the family neighborhood in Seongbuk-dong, enough that a determined woman with internet access, a translation app, and 2 years of survival Korean could locate a family. Beverly spent 2 weeks researching without announcing herself. Then she sat down and wrote a letter to Mrs. Kang, Min-jae's mother, the woman she'd seen in photographs Min-jae had described that night, the emotional center of his family. The letter took 4 days to write. She drafted it in English and paid a translation service to convert it to Korean, then had Jiyeon read it to check the formality of the language. She did not ask for anything. She said, "Your son doesn't know he has a daughter. I thought you should. I'm not asking for anything from your family, but she has his face and she should know where she comes from. Her name is Sayla." She included a photograph. Sayla at 4 months, asleep, her expression containing unmistakable traces of a man she had never met. She sent it. She waited. No response came. 3 weeks? 5 weeks? 2 months? Nothing. Beverly, who had learned to interpret silence as an answer, understood. She told Danielle on a call that she was done trying to reach Min-jae's family. "I did what I could," she said. "I'm not going to keep pushing into a door that's closed." "How do you feel?" Danielle asked. Beverly thought about it. "Like I did the right thing and it didn't work, which is somehow worse than not trying." "Yeah," Danielle said. "It usually is." What Beverly didn't know was that Mrs. Kang had received the letter, read it multiple times, and pressed it inside the book she kept on her nightstand. Mrs. Kang was sick, had been sick for over a year, in the way she had been telling everyone was manageable, which it was no longer. She was carrying 2 things at once, her own dying and this letter about a woman in Seoul raising her son's daughter. She couldn't contact Beverly without telling Min-jae, and she couldn't tell Min-jae because he was deployed, communication limited, and she was protecting him the way she had protected everyone she loved her entire life. From things she wasn't sure they could hold while they were trying to survive something else. So she made a decision, the only way she had left. She wrote 4 words in her own handwriting on a piece of paper and tucked it inside the book beside Beverly's letter. She did not tell anyone. She carried it alone, with the deliberateness of a woman deciding what she wants to leave behind. She died on a Tuesday in October. Beverly read the obituary at 6 a.m., Sayla asleep in the next room, a coffee going cold on the counter. She had set an alert for the family name months ago, half hoping, half dreading, and here it was. She sat with it for 2 full days. She looked up Min-jae's service end date. 3 weeks. The discharge ceremony location was publicly listed. She went to Sayla's closet and took out the white dress she had bought 3 months ago and hung there without explanation, the way you prepare for a thing you haven't admitted to yourself yet. She looked at her daughter. "We're going to a ceremony," she said. "I need you to be brave." Sayla said, "Jige?" "After," Beverly said. "I promise." She called Danielle the night before. "I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind." "You're not losing your mind," Danielle said immediately. "I'm taking my 2-year-old to a military discharge ceremony to introduce her to her father, who doesn't know she exists in front of a hall full of strangers." A pause. "Okay, that sounds like a lot when you say it out loud." "Danielle, you're not losing your mind," Danielle said again, more firmly. "You've been the most clear-headed person in this situation since day 1. You know why you're going. You know what you're asking for and what you're not asking for. Go. Take her. Let her see his face. What if he reacts badly? Then you take Sayla home and you make jejige and you know you tried," Danielle said. "What if he doesn't?" Beverly was quiet. "What if he doesn't react badly?" Danielle said again, softer. "You've been ready for the worst for 3 years. Are you ready for it to be okay?" Beverly thought about that for a long time after she hung up. The ceremony was everything she had imagined and nothing she was prepared for. She stood at the back of the hall with Sayla on her hip, and she found Min-jae in the rows of uniformed men, and she watched him scan the door for family one time, and then stop scanning, and she felt the distance of nearly 3 years in her chest, like a physical weight. He was different. Not older exactly, but more completely himself, the way people become when they've been stripped to essentials and had to rebuild. He was leaner, stiller, carrying something heavier behind the eyes. She watched him decide he was alone, and she almost let him stay that way. The moment opened up. The door, the exit, the easier version of this where she turned around and went home and told herself she'd been reasonable, she'd been appropriate, she hadn't forced anything on anyone. She shifted Sayla's weight. She looked at the door. Sayla said, in her clear, certain voice, "Down." Beverly looked at her daughter. Sayla was looking at Minjae with the focused attention of a child who has located something specific. Beverly lowered her, and Sayla walked. Beverly watched her daughter cross that floor and felt something crack open in her chest. Not grief, not joy, something underneath both of those. Something that had been waiting for 3 years to have somewhere to go. She watched Minjae go down to one knee, watched his face, watched him look up. He found her. They looked at each other across the hall for what was probably 5 seconds and felt like the entire length of the previous 3 years compressed. He stood, Sayla's hand in his, and walked toward her. They went outside. The ceremony continued without them. Irrelevant. In the parking lot, in the November cold, they stood 3 feet apart, and Minjae said, "How old is she?" 2 years and 8 months. He did the math. She watched him do it. Watched him locate the night in Mappo inside the calculation. Watched something move across his face that he controlled before it could become anything visible. "Why didn't you contact me when I got back?" he said. "How long have you—" He stopped, recalculated. "You were here. You stayed in Seoul." "Yes. Alone." "Yes." He looked at Sayla, who was looking up at him with complete patience. "With her." "Her name is Sayla," Beverly said. "She said her first word at the stove while I was making doenjang jjigae at 2 a.m. and it wasn't mama. It was the soup. She walked at 11 months. She calls everything she likes by name, and she has liked exactly 3 people in her life. Me, my friend Jiyeon, and apparently you, since she walked across a hall full of strangers to find you, which she has never done with anyone." Beverly held his gaze. "She has your face, Minjae. She has Jisu's hands." Something in Minjae's expression broke at Jisu's name. "You remembered her name?" he said. "I remembered everything you said that night," Beverly said. "I didn't know what to do with it, but I remembered." Minjae looked at Sayla. Sayla, who had been holding a small cracker with the patience of someone saving something important for the right moment, held it out to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He took it. He ate it. Sayla nodded. Test passed. Beverly watched this and felt the closest thing to joy she had felt in a very long time, and also something adjacent to terror, because this was the moment she had built toward for 3 years. And now that it was here, she understood that beginnings are not endings. This was not a resolution. This was a door opening, and she had no idea what was on the other side. "I should have left a note," Minjae said. "Yes," Beverly said. No softening. No performance. Just, yes. I know what you were," Beverly said. "I'm not standing here to collect an apology. I'm standing here because she is 2 years and 8 months old," and she pointed at a man in uniform on television and said, "Daddy, and she deserves more than a photograph." She looked at him directly. "That's why I came. Not for me." Minjae said quietly, "What about you?" Beverly looked at him for a moment. "I've been managing what I need for 3 years. I'm very good at it." She picked up Sayla. "I'm not asking you to fix that." She walked to her car. Sayla waved over her shoulder at him. He stood in the parking lot and watched them go and did not move for a long time. The days that followed were not soft, not cinematic, not the part of the story anyone wants to fast forward to the warmth of. Minjae was overwhelmed in the way that looked, from the outside, like absence. He had lost his mother 11 days before his service ended. He had a daughter he had not known existed. He had a woman who had built a life in Seoul alone for nearly 3 years. who was not asking him for anything, which was somehow harder to receive than if she had been demanding something, because a woman who doesn't ask for anything has either learned she won't get it or has decided she doesn't need it, and neither of those was something he could be comfortable with. He texted Beverly once, 4 days after the ceremony. "Can I see Sayla?" Not a question. Beverly noticed that. She wrote back, "Saturday, 10 a.m. He showed up at 9:47. Sayla opened the door. Beverly had taught her to reach the handle, and she used this skill constantly and without permission, and looked at Minjae on the doorstep. "Daddy," Sayla said, the same certainty as the ceremony hall. Minjae crouched down. "Yes," he said, which was the bravest word Beverly had heard anyone say in a long time. He came in. He sat on the floor with Sayla because that was where she was, and he let her demonstrate her most important toys one by one with the thoroughness of someone conducting a professional presentation. Beverly made coffee. She brought him a cup. She did not sit beside him. She sat in the chair across the room and worked on her laptop and let this happen without managing it. It was the hardest thing she had done since the parking lot. Maybe harder. She called Danielle that night after Sayla was asleep. "He came," she said. "How was it?" "He sat on my floor for 2 hours while she showed him her toys." Beverly, "I know. How are you?" Beverly was quiet for a moment. "I'm fine." Beverly, "I came here for Sayla," Beverly said. "I keep reminding myself that's true." "It is true," Danielle said carefully. "And it's also true that you're a person who is allowed to want things for herself. Both things can be true at the same time." "He hasn't asked about me at all," Beverly said. "He comes, he's with Sayla, he's present. He's actually present with her, Danielle, the way some fathers never manage to be. And he doesn't look at me the way he did in Mapo." "He's overwhelmed," Danielle said. "I know. Give it time." "I've given this 3 years," Beverly said. "I'm running low on time as a resource." The tension between them was building in the specific way of two people who have history and unfinished business, and are both, for different reasons, refusing to be the one to name it. Minjae was present and careful and distant in a way that Beverly found more difficult than if he'd been absent, because she could feel him holding something back, and she couldn't tell if it was grief or reluctance or something she didn't have a category for. He showed up one Thursday with groceries. No announcement. Beverly opened the door and he said, "I want to cook." "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." He made miyeokguk. Beverly stood at the edge of the kitchen and watched him and said nothing, and felt the particular torture of a woman who is trying not to want something that is standing in her kitchen making soup. They ate in the silence of two people who have things to say and aren't saying them. Sayla sat between them and narrated the meal in her bilingual logic and was entirely unbothered by the atmospheric tension of the adults on either side of her. After Sayla was in bed, Beverly came back to the kitchen to find Minjae washing dishes. "You don't have to do that," she said. "You said that about the cooking too," he said, without turning around. "It keeps being true." He turned off the tap, turned around, and for the first time since the parking lot, he looked at her the way he'd looked at her in Mapo, fully, without managing it. "I think about that night," he said. Beverly held very still. "I thought about it in the water," he said. "I thought about what you said, about running towards something or away from it." He looked at his hands. "I was running away. You were right about that." "I know," Beverly said quietly. "I left because I was a man who was about to fall apart in front of someone he'd just met, and I didn't know how to let that happen," he said. I'm not explaining it as an excuse. I know. I'm explaining it because you remembered everything I said that night, and I want you to know it went both ways." He looked at her. "I remembered too." Beverly looked at him across her kitchen. "Minjae, I'm not saying it's enough," he said quickly. "I know it's not enough. I know what you built here, and I know what it cost, and I know you're not asking me to make up for any of it." He picked up his jacket. "I'm just saying I remembered," He left. Beverly stood in her kitchen for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called Danielle. He remembered, she said, the moment Danielle picked up. What? Danielle said. He said he remembered everything from that night. He thought about it during service. Silence. Then Danielle said, Beverly Williams. I know. Your man remembered. He's not my... He made you soup and he remembered, and you called me at 11 p.m., Danielle said. He is absolutely your man. Now go to sleep. Beverly looked at her dark kitchen, the pot from the miyokok still on the stove. Good night, Danielle, she said. Good night, you stubborn, brilliant woman, Danielle said. Mr. Kang's investment firm was the kind of place that told you everything about a family in decline before anyone said a word. Beverly went for the first time when Min-jae asked her to look at something. He phrased it as wanting her professional opinion, which was the most careful he'd been with her yet, and which she chose not to examine too closely. She walked in and saw it immediately. Dark wood, closed blinds, framed certificates from 20 years ago, furniture that belonged to a different era, the feeling of a room that had stopped believing in its own future and was sitting in its own history waiting to be officially over. Clients walked into this office and felt a family's grief pressing on them from every corner. The firm's fundamentals were sound. Beverly had looked at what Min-jae showed her, the client relationships, the portfolio history. The business wasn't the problem. The room was the problem. The room said, "We have given up." Min-jae said, looking around, "He needs to stop living in here." Beverly was already doing calculations. "Let me redesign it," she said. Min-jae looked at her. "Beverly, this is what I do," she said. "Not to prove anything, not to earn anything, because I can see exactly what needs to happen in this room, and your father cannot see it from inside his own grief, and I can. Let me do my job." This was the moment, if you haven't figured it out yet, where Beverly Williams stopped surviving and started building. Comment below if you see the difference, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what's coming in the final stretch of this story is the thing nobody saw coming, least of all Beverly. Mr. Kang agreed to the redesign without enthusiasm, which Beverly took as sufficient. She spent 2 weeks on Dyeonju and it, not long by any measure, but Beverly worked with the focus of someone who has spent 3 years learning to build things properly, to not waste space or sentiment. She kept what mattered: the certificates, a photograph of the firm in its early days, the original desk, which had good bones under 30 years of accumulated clutter. She removed what was blocking the light, both literally and architecturally. She brought the outside in. She created a room that said, "We have been through something, and we are still here." On the morning of the reveal, Mr. Kang stood in the doorway of his redesigned office for a long moment. Sila was on Beverly's hip. Min-jae stood beside her. Mr. Kang looked at everything Beverly had done, and he said, not to anyone specifically, but to the room, "It feels like somewhere I could start again." He turned. He looked at Beverly. He nodded once, the complete nod of a man who does not speak in declarations, but means precisely what he communicates. Beverly nodded back. That was how she was accepted into the Kang family. No ceremony, no announcement. A nod across a redesigned room, a child on her hip, a man beside her who was finally, slowly, learning how to stand next to her without holding himself at a careful distance. Lorraine Williams arrived from Atlanta on a Thursday and walked into Beverly's apartment and looked at it the way a mother looks at a daughter's life. Carefully, completely, taking inventory of the signs of a woman who is coping versus a woman who is actually okay. The apartment was warm, deliberate. Sila's drawings were taped beside the kitchen window. It smelled like coffee and doenjang jjigae and a life that had been built by hand. Lorraine said, "You did all this yourself?" "Yes. The apartment, the baby, all of it." "Yes, Mama." Lorraine sat down at the kitchen table and looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Okay," she said, which, from Lorraine Williams, was everything. Min-jae came to dinner 2 days in. He brought myeokguk because Beverly had mentioned her mother liked soup, and Lorraine noted this without commenting. Dinner was warm and slightly formal, and Sila ran it according to her own agenda, which helped. Lorraine watched Min-jae with her granddaughter with the focused attention of a woman who is making a permanent assessment. Near the end of the meal, Lorraine set down her chopsticks. She had conquered them with the focused determination of a woman who does not accept being defeated by utensils. And looked at Min-jae directly. "My daughter did not come to Seoul for you," she said. "She came because she was trying to figure herself out, and a man wasted 4 months of her time, and she had the misfortune of meeting you at the most honest moment of her life. Then she stayed alone, in a country where she didn't speak the language, while she was pregnant, and she built something real." Lorraine's voice was even and completely serious. "I need to know you understand that you did not build this with her. You are being invited into something she built alone. Those are different things." Min-jae held Lorraine's gaze without flinching. "I know they're different," he said. "I know exactly what she built and what it cost. I was in service for 3 years, and I thought about the woman I met in that bar more times than I can count, and I came home to find out she had done something extraordinary that had nothing to do with me." He paused. "I'm not trying to take credit for any of it. I'm trying to figure out how to be worth being let in." Lorraine looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Beverly. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, because there was nothing to forgive. Recognition. A mother seeing that her daughter had chosen something real, and chosen someone who understood what real meant. "Pass the soup," Lorraine said. 3 days before Lorraine's flight home, Min-jae knocked on Beverly's door, at 9 in the evening. Lorraine announced she was tired and went to the bedroom, which was neither true nor subtle, and Beverly loved her for it. They sat at the kitchen table. Sila was asleep. The apartment was quiet, in the way that means something is about to be said. Min-jae put a book on the table. Old, worn at the spine. Beverly recognized it without knowing how. "I found this when I was clearing out her things," he said. "She kept things inside it. Notes she wrote to herself." He opened it. "And your letter." Beverly went very still. "She kept it," he said. "She had it the whole time. She'd marked passages in the margins the way she marked everything she read that mattered to her." He looked at Beverly. "She knew about Sila. She knew about you. From the beginning." Beverly said nothing. She was doing the calculation. All the months she had assumed silence meant rejection. All the two Ambw telling herself she had tried and been turned away. All the time she had told Sila, who was too young to understand, "We tried, baby. We tried." All of that laid against the fact of a woman who had read her letter multiple times and pressed it inside a book she slept beside. "Why didn't she respond?" Beverly said. Her voice was steady. She had learned in 3 years to ask questions steadily, even when the answers were not going to be steady. "She was sick," Min-jae said. "More sick than she told anyone. She couldn't contact you without telling me, and she couldn't tell me while I was deployed, and she was protecting me. The way she always protected everyone." Something in his jaw worked. "And I think she wasn't sure what to do with it. You were a woman she'd never met. Asking for nothing, raising her grandchild alone in Seoul. She was trying to figure out what the right thing was, and she was running out of time to figure it out." "So she didn't do anything," Beverly said. "She did one thing," Min-jae said. He turned to the back page of the book and turned it to face Beverly. His mother's handwriting, careful cursive, the precision of a woman who had learned to write in an era that valued it. Written in Korean, and below it the English translation, as though Mrs. Kang had wanted to be absolutely sure the meaning was unmistakable, as though she had written it for Beverly specifically, knowing her son would find it and knowing he would understand what it meant. "She stays. Let her stay." Beverly read the words twice. Then she sat back and looked at the ceiling and breathed. She thought about the pharmacy floor. The crib assembled alone on a Saturday afternoon. Jion's handwritten notes, the market grandmother with the scallions, 3 years of 2 a.m. jjigae in a dark kitchen, talking to a baby who couldn't talk back, building a life from nothing in a language she had learned out of necessity and stubbornness and refusal to leave. She had thought, every one of those nights, that she was doing it completely, alone. Mrs. Kang, a woman she had never met, a woman she had written to and heard nothing from, a woman who had been dying while Beverly was surviving, had read her letter and looked at her daughter's photograph and made a decision, alone, with the time she had left. She had written 4 words and hidden them where her son would find them when she was gone, because she couldn't say them out loud and she couldn't leave without saying them. She stays. Let her stay. Beverly's eyes filled. Not slowly, all at once. 3 years of held together coming undone at the evidence that someone had been on her side in the silence. She never met Sayla, Beverly said. No. She never saw her face. No, Beverly looked at Minjae across the table. But she chose her anyway, from a letter and a photograph. She chose her. She chose you both, Minjae said. His voice was very careful, the voice of a man holding his own grief with both hands in order to give someone else the thing they need. My mother didn't make decisions like that lightly. She didn't say that about people. He held Beverly's gaze. She was right, Beverly cried, really cried for the first time in everything. Not controlled, not managed, not the kind of crying you do when you're keeping it together for a baby or a landlord negotiation or a ceremony hall, but the full release of a woman who has been stronger than she should have had to be for a very long time and has just been told that someone saw her doing it. Minjae didn't move immediately. He let it be what it was. Then he reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Beverly looked at their hands, then at him. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I know, he said. My mother already decided. If this story has sat somewhere in your chest, like it, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what broke you first. Was it the 4 words? The ceremony? The 2 a.m. jjigae? Drop it below because the conversation in the comments is half the reason this channel exists. Sayla's 3rd birthday arrived the way the best mornings do, quietly, with light coming through windows Beverly had chosen herself, in an apartment that smelled like coffee and something warm on the stove. Beverly came out of her bedroom to find Minjae already in the kitchen. He had let himself in with the key she had given him 3 weeks ago, which she had handed over without ceremony, without declaration, just placed in his palm one afternoon and said, "You're here enough," and gone back to her work. He had taken it the same way, without ceremony, with the complete seriousness of a man who understood that the gesture meant something specific and did not want to handle it carelessly. He was at the stove. Sayla was on the counter beside him, both feet swinging, conducting a bilingual narration of the cooking process with the authority of someone who considers herself a primary contributor. Lorraine sat at the kitchen table with her coffee. Her flight was tomorrow, watching everything with the expression of a woman who came to Seoul uncertain and is leaving certain, which is not the same as having all her questions answered, but is a different and more important thing. Minjae was making myeokguk, birthday soup, made on a child's birthday to honor the mother, to say, this child came from someone, that someone deserves to be seen. He had bought the ingredients himself 2 days ago. He had not asked Beverly if this was okay. He had simply decided, and Beverly had understood the decision completely, and had not said anything about it because some gestures are damaged by commentary. Beverly leaned in the doorway and looked at her kitchen. She thought about Atlanta, a doctor's office with a careful voice and the specific terror of a window narrowing, a man's laugh through a restaurant window, a phrase book dropped in a bin, a bar in Mapo November, a man with napkins, and no small talk, a pharmacy floor, a stove at 2 a.m. I live here. My name is Beverly. I'm not leaving. A letter sent into silence. 4 words in a dead woman's handwriting. She had not come to Seoul for this. She had come running from something, because that is what people do. They think they're choosing a direction, and they're actually being aimed by everything they're trying to escape. Seoul had been her exit, and it had become her life. And the difference between those two things was 3 years of choosing it again, every morning, including the mornings when choosing it was the hardest thing available to her. Sayla looked over from her spot on the counter, pointed at the pot. "Mama," she said in her Korean English voice that was entirely and only hers. "Jjigae," Beverly smiled, felt it go all the way through her. "I know, baby," she said. "I know." Minjae glanced back at her over his shoulder. Brief, warm, the look of a man who is standing inside his own life and has decided, fully, to stay in it. Lorraine lifted her coffee cup in Beverly's direction. Not a toast, just acknowledgement. "I see you. I see what you built. I understand." Now Beverly pushed off the door frame and walked into her kitchen. Sayla held her arms out. Beverly picked her up, settled her on her hip. This familiar weight, this person who had been her whole reason and her whole daily life and her whole evidence that the right decisions don't always look right while you're making them. "Happy birthday," Beverly said against her daughter's hair, in Korean, because some things you learn in a new language first and they stay there. Outside the window, Seoul was doing what Seoul always did, enormous, indifferent, continuous, entirely unbothered by the small, extraordinary things happening inside it. Beverly Williams had come here for the wrong reason. She had stayed for every right one. Danielle had said on a 2 a.m. phone call over a pot of doenjang jjigae a long time ago, "What does it feel like?" "The life you're building there," Beverly had said. "It feels like mine." It still did. More than ever. Better than she'd planned. That was the whole story. Like this video if Beverly Williams lived in your chest for the last hour. Subscribe because there are more of these stories coming and you do not want to miss what's next. And comment one thing. Was Beverly brave or was she reckless? Because that question has been sitting in the comments of every story I've ever told. And it never gets old, and I want your honest answer. See you in the next one.